Notifications on?
Run, quick, quick.
Hey, it was really hot today.
Good evening. I'd like to call this special meeting to order for July 18th, 2023. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Parsbeck.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Graves.
Here.
Trustee Hardy.
Yes.
Trustee Butler.
Here.
Trustee Murphy.
Here.
Trustee Albrecht and Trustee Ayers are not present.
Okay, thank you. Tonight is a special meeting, so there'll be no general public comment, but we'll allow it on this specific item and no reports at the end. As you in the room are probably aware and online, this is regarding mosquito spraying in particular. And I'll turn this over to Administrator Kirk.
Thank you, Mayor Karsbeck. As you know, the board approved the policy last August 22. That for all intents and purposes said that based on our testing data that we do weekly for mosquitoes and West Nile virus, that if we had 2 weeks of consecutive vector index above 0.75, that we would call a special meeting and have the board consider whether or not to spray adulticide for mosquito control in the town limits. So that's why we're here tonight. There's the test data and reports were in your packet. The vector indexes are higher than I've ever seen them. This last week, the vector index was calculated over 3.0, and our previous spray threshold was 0.5. And so that's a fairly significant number. To be honest, as staff, we're not really well equipped to explain to you in scientific detail what that means, but we do have representatives from the Public Health Department, the Environmental Health Department, Colorado State University, and others on the line joining us tonight. So if you have some questions, we'll look to Tom Gonzalez, who is our Health Department Director, and then he might pass us to the appropriate staff member or partner to help explain some of the details or answer some of the questions that you might have.
Excellent, thank you. That was the introduction, right?
That was it.
Okay, Director Tom Gonzalez of Public Health, are you available right now?
I am, yes.
Welcome,
Good
thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Do you mind giving just a brief overview of the vector index and how that's calculated?
Yes, Kim Meyer-Lee, our senior disease investigator, been doing this for quite some time. I'll turn that over to Kim if we can. She's quite the expert when it comes to vector index.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Kim Meyer-Lee. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you, Kim.
Great. So, I'll talk a little bit about the mosquito trapping and the vector index. I don't know if we have our lab people on just yet, but
Okay.
They might also want to give some input into how that vector index is calculated and how the data actually plays into that. So when we do our mosquito trapping, we're really just taking a sample of that mosquito population that might be out there on any certain night. The number of mosquitoes collected might be influenced by the weather. If it's windy, if it's raining, you might not collect as many mosquitoes. But Berthoud traps, I believe, 1 night a week. So those mosquitoes are collected and sorted out. We sort out all the culex from those traps, and then we can test them. For Berthoud, only a portion of those mosquitoes are actually, the culex are actually tested. Just because we had so many, we had over 5,000 culex mosquitoes from your traps in the last week. So while we can't test every mosquito that lands in the trap, we do test a portion of those and see what we get from that. So this last week, we did have a positive trap for West Nile, and then we had positive traps in the previous week too. So while we can't trap every mosquito or test every mosquito, we can still learn a lot just from the numbers that we're getting. We've had 3 positive traps in the last 2 weeks, so we know that there's West Nile out there. And it's circulating in those mosquitoes that are out there. And then the other thing to look at too is just the sheer numbers that we have. We had over 5,000 mosquitoes that were Culex in those traps from this last week. And that's probably more than what we've ever seen for this time of year. So we have a huge number of mosquitoes, and we know that West Nile is circulating in that population, so those two things combined do create a higher concern for mosquitoes transmitting West Nile to humans. And keep in mind that it only takes one mosquito that's infected to bite someone and cause an infection. As for the vector index does take into account not only the abundance of the mosquitoes, but also the infection rates of the mosquitoes. We usually don't see infection or vector indexes at 3 and above, so that's really unusual. So I don't know if our lab person is on. Tom, do you know if our lab person is on? Comment more about the testing part of that?
Yes, Greg, I believe you are on. There he is. And I do have to say, I do appreciate our partners at CSU. Greg comes to us on vacation, out of the country. So thank you, Greg, for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to come and fill in where I can. I think Kim pretty much said what needs to be said about vector index. It's determined by how many mosquitoes are out there, and then how many of them are likely to be infected based on our sampling. And so I think that the news isn't good in Berthoud, and that is largely driven by just the extremely high number of Culex tarsalis mosquitoes that are out there. I think that's pretty much what you need to know about that. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I just have some general questions that I'm sure people are thinking have been asked in the past. How effective would you say that the adult deciding program is as far as the instant threat and kind of a long term? Would we see a high number next week? Can we predict that? If we did go ahead and spray?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate that question, trustee. I'm going to just say a couple things. I'll turn it over to our environmental health manager, Chris Manley, who's got a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this question. What we're seeing is an unprecedented amount of Culex species of mosquitoes. When Kim said 5,000, last year at this time, 48 were trapped. Same traps, same locations. This is not even in the same zip code about the number of mosquitoes. So what we're looking at here is knocking down that adult mosquito that continues that cycle. And we appreciate the town of Berthoud and all the larviciding you're doing with all the water. That helps prevent it as well. But typically what we see is when you have an adult decide, which we take very seriously, we don't encourage just nuisance, only when there's a vector index that's showing signs that it's leading towards human cases. We knock that down, then we can keep up on our larvicide. Typically what we see is reduced rates for previous weeks. Now it's all weather dependent, but this is something new for us. We've never seen anything with an abundance 5,000, not even 2,000. So that's quite a number that's pretty unprecedented for us. With that, I'll turn it over to Chris.
Yeah,
Thanks, Tom, and I would probably echo Tom's comments almost exactly. The adulticide is very effective, and we do typically see week to week we'll see numbers decrease after an adulticide treatment. We also know that a large part playing into why we're seeing such a high numbers and such an abundance is the weather that we had largely in June. Mosquitoes are gonna last. They're gonna be out there for 4 to 6 weeks. Typically as adult mosquitoes. So what we hope is that an adulticide treatment would get those numbers back to more of a normal seasonal level. And then moving forward, we fall back into our normal routine of monitoring traps as we normally do. We're just in such an odd situation with the weather we had in June, creating these significant numbers.
Okay, thank you. Trustees, any questions?
I've just got comments.
Mayor Pro Tem?
When you said the percentage of Culex tested, I guess what kind of percentage are we assured of here in terms of, say, 5,000 were caught? Did you test 100, 200? Essentially, I want to make sure that sample size is accurate for any appropriate West Nile virus testing, and it's not just we found 3 of the entire 5,000.
That's a wonderful question. I'll turn that back over to our CSU partner, Greg, that did that actual testing lab. I will say, before I turn over, is the challenge here was the unprecedented amount of mosquitoes to actually do the process of testing them. The time is the issue to be able to actually do it, because typically we were dealing with 48, 100, 5,000. But with that, I'll turn it over to Greg, because I think it was about 14% of that sample size actually were tested for West Nile virus.
Yeah, that's about right. So the numbers that we have from this last week is that we collected from the Berthoud traps 145 Culex pipiens, 5,135 Culex tarsalis, and so that was a total of 5,280. And these were tested in pools that included 55 Culex pipiens and 703 Culex tarsalis. So of the 5,135 we tested, 758, which is 14.4% of those that were collected were tested. And out of the 18 pools that those 703 were put into, 2 of them were positive, and they were both Culex tarsalis mosquitoes.
Okay. Trustee Murphy?
I actually had a few questions. Dr. Gonzalez, we had an email exchange on this topic last year, and just to remind you of kind of what I discussed in those emails was I was wondering where the vector index came from and what kind of studies backed that. And you responded, I believe, there were 2 different studies that founded the core of Larimer County Health's policy on this. I believe one was from 2009 and the other was from 2013, looking at mosquito surveillance as well as Culex cases in northeastern Colorado. I don't know if you have those exact citations. I misplaced my notes on those, but am I correct in that?
Yes, you are. I'd have to pull them up myself, and Kim Meyerly may have a better knowledge of that, but yeah, that sounds correct, sir.
Okay. The second part of that is one of the major findings regarding the vector index, from my understanding, was that there was a strong correlation between not only female population, but also vector index. Once it hit 0.5, the population was likely to have West Nile several weeks later. And by 1, you were almost certain to see human cases after that. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. And we had a test of 3 the other week. Am I correct in that? Or slightly above 3?
Yeah, the vector index was 3.029 to be exact. Yeah.
Thank you. Those were my questions. I was trying to get to the bottom of this last year, and I really appreciate you all coming tonight and sharing your advice and comments on this issue and notifying the town of it. So, thank you.
Absolutely, we have a duty, you're welcome.
Other questions?
I had a couple.
Trustee Butler.
Thank you. Not really sure who to address this to, but admittedly, I'm not an expert on this. I do appreciate your input to help us guide this in direction. Reading this packet, it appears that the testing location or sites were different test sites. I think for the last week to this week, we had 2 positive or higher vector index ratings from the previous week, and then the really high one this week was from a different site that were pretty far apart geographically, over 4 miles. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, you are, that is correct.
Okay. So the site that was taken is really the far east of our town boundaries, surrounded by Larimer County, area. My next question is, does Larimer County, given that this test at this specific site was high, does that trigger any other adulticide from Larimer County in the region?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, yes. We want to collaborate with the town if possible. We've done that with Fort Collins when it extends outside of the incorporated to the unincorporated. Yes, we have a budget and we will work with BDCI and your staff if so desire to make that happen, but yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit more, I guess, about how that logistically works? When and how do you guys decide to adulticide versus we do internally within town limits like we are tonight? When will that get triggered?
Yeah, I think Erica, I know you're involved in that matter. Would you mind addressing that, please?
Sure. Hi, yes, thank you, Erica, Kathy with Communicable Disease. So we do work with each municipality based on their policy. So Fort Collins, they use a vector index. We work with them weekly to determine adulticiding. Loveland has a different policy, so we just work within the policy of each municipality. I know Loveland is conducting spraying, and so is Fort Collins this week. So yeah, we could work to cover any areas that Berthoud wasn't able to cover if they decide to spray.
Okay, so Larimer County will, at some capacity, trigger spraying themselves outside of unincorporated areas? I guess I'm just gonna ask a simple question of, does Larimer County spray in unincorporated areas?
We do. Tom, we do spray the unincorporated areas. For example, when we work with the city of Fort Collins and they decide that they are gonna do an adulticide application and their areas outline their city limits, then we will cover those spray areas.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, that's all the questions I have.
Anything else?
No, I read on.
Trustee Hardy.
Read on the Larimer County website, I thought it stated that that Larimer County does not spray. When was the last time that Larimer County actually sprayed?
Did you hear that, Erica? When was the last time that Larimer County sprayed?
I have to look back, but I believe we did have some spray last year in the unincorporated areas. I know, Kim, would you happen to know? I know in 2021 for sure we did spray some of the unincorporated areas.
Yeah, we have sprayed those unincorporated areas in the city of Fort Collins several years, depending on what our testing is showing us. And we try to do it in conjunction with those sprayings that the city does. So we don't do a separate one, but we try to work it in on the same night so that it's kind of one unified spray event.
Thank you, Kim, that was great. Sorry, I was on mute and I couldn't get unmuted. The reason being, it's all about communication. I remember last year, you heard folks maybe feeling surprised about the spray. So we like to coordinate with the municipality so the communication comes out in concert. Folks feel like they've heard that communication and can make adjustments as necessary. I do want to come back to the great question about the traps that this week, the 2 traps more towards the town did not show positive West Nile virus mosquitoes, but I'd be caution on that because only 14% of all all of those mosquitoes were actually sampled. So the odds are they are positive. Mosquitoes over there that we found the week prior, just due to the over sheer number of mosquitoes and only being able to do 14%, that we didn't be able to even get, near the amount of mosquitoes we'd love to have tested by the number. So it's there, you have the abundance. I wouldn't look just at 1 week in a trap. Those can vary week to week, vary based on numbers, vary based on weather, wind pattern for that night. But the assumption is there's West Nile virus within the bird population in those 3 trap areas which cover that quadrant that you guys created with the 5 traps.
So you're basically saying we should assume there's West Nile, but then again, if we tested every single mosquito, what would those numbers have been? Because we only tested a small portion of them. So to assume a fact, I don't wanna go that way.
You're not assuming it was there the week before, so
Yeah, it's the week
it
before.
doesn't just disappear, it's in the birds and then the mosquitoes. So again, and it would be hard to make an assumption about what the next other 86% if we tested it. But it was there the week prior. And typically, we don't see it just disappear from 1 week to the next.
But the test didn't reflect that.
Yeah, because 86% of the mosquitoes were not tested. Only 14% due to the abundance.
So we're assuming that,
No, it was there the week before.
which is tested positive, so it's a fact. But then we get the testing the next week, no positive. So, to me, one's positive, one's negative. There's no assumption.
Director Gonzalez, does Fort Collins or anyone else do spot spraying, and if so, what's the efficacy on that? If Bertha was just to look at high trap areas?
I'm sorry, thank you for the question, spot spraying.
Like zone spraying or just spraying in a particular area with the high count?
Yes, Fort Collins does that, typically by quadrants. So they have almost 90 traps, throughout the city centers. But yes, and in this case, they are spraying this Sunday and they're combining a couple quadrants. But yeah, they're not spraying the whole city of Fort Collins. They're spraying the southwest and southeast quadrants of Fort Collins. So yes, they do that, and that's part of their plan and policy.
Are ours far enough apart that would work?
You could, yes, absolutely, that would be an option.
Other questions?
Well, I was gonna get to the same question, and I guess to staff, per current policy administrator, does that allow us this specific site kind of spray target areas?
I think the policy the board adopted last year was broad enough. For all intents and purposes, the only thing the board asked us to do is bring this meeting to you if we had 2 consecutive weeks of 0.75. And ultimately, the decision rests with the town board.
And that's based on any test site testing positive over that 0.75 threshold.
Yeah, we don't have a policy that outlines where we spray in that context. The prior policy from 2017 was a little more explicit, but we rescinded that policy and basically said if we have 2 weeks of consecutive 0.75 index or higher, that we would have a special meeting for the board to decide what to do next. So I think you have the flexibility as the town board to make that decision.
To spray or not spray, or spray a certain part of town.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay. No more questions. I'll open it up to public comment. We'll start with those in this room that wish to speak. If you would come to the front to the podium here, state your name and address, and please try and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And above all, thank you for showing up tonight. If you have anyone who wishes to raise your hand, great, please.
My name is Richard Rupp, 534 5th Street, Bertha. I want to thank the town and everyone for this opportunity, 3 minutes. What I heard here tonight was, yeah, there's mosquitoes out there. There's more than last year, excuse me, and they have West Nile. But what I haven't heard is what does that mean for me, okay? Is it, does that mean, 1 in 100,000 deaths, by chance? What does that mean? I didn't hear any conversation on that. The other thing is I didn't hear any conversation on the cure for this and what kind of, long-term effects that it might have. And that's why I'm here tonight. My experience with organics and inorganics testing is limited, but I do know how complicated it is. I appreciate, I believe with CSU up there for their statistics, but my concern is the long-term, basically it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater scenario. Are we gonna make a situation that looks a little bit scary, some unknowns? We don't know how it's gonna affect us. We understand getting West Nile is serious, nobody wants to get it. Nobody wants to have our neighbors get it. But until we answer the questions of how am I gonna be impacted? What is the long-term effects of spraying? That is one of my biggest concerns. Everyone hears on the news every day, Forever Chemicals. I remember 25 years ago getting a call from the head of chemical immigrations from one of the big companies with the Forever Chemicals. It was talked about 25 years ago. Up to now, we're just starting to realize, oops, that was an oops. I don't want this to be another oops that we go ahead and spray to do some risk. So the other thing I'd like to close with, being from the garden city or garden town, is when I went out this morning to pick raspberries, I did this. And this is gonna take me, 5 seconds? I'd like to believe that there's other ways to deal with this than just going out and spraying. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rupp. Anyone else? Nada, thank you.
Hey, thank you for having this meeting and for inviting us. I'm Sheena. I live on 315 Nebraska.
Sheena, what was your last name?
Chand, C-H-A-N-D.
Okay, thank you.
And I think you bring up some very good questions. There are so many unknowns about spraying, but I think there are so many knowns about the risk for West Nile. And it is something like 1 in 150 people who are affected by West Nile can have very serious outcomes, particularly for our elderly population, which is not really terribly elderly when you look at it. It's anybody over 60 has a statistically higher risk for a more negative outcome with West Nile. So it's rare, absolutely. Most people don't even know that they've had West Nile. But I think what Sean was alluding to as far as the studies that backed up that concern for the higher vector index means we would potentially see people in our community be affected by West Nile. And I don't know extensively about the adulticides either, but as far as my understanding is, it's a fairly limited timeframe, limited effect. And certainly you're right, the Forever Chemicals, like who knows 50 years from now. But I think it's that balance of known risks and potential risks, and I think the risks of West Nile are considerable. And I think our colleagues at CSU that brought up the issue with you don't want to spray willy-nilly if there's no reason to. Certainly, I think all of our preventatives as far as the larvicides are great and preferable. But when the need is there, I think it can be a very worthwhile option. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Sir.
Brian Lack, 706 7th Street. Purely anecdotal, but last 2 nights ago, I got out of my truck and I saw just tons. I thought they were bats, and they were just all over 7th Street. But they were too small, and I looked again, and they were not bats. They were dragonflies. So just throwing that out there, like there are little critters that eat them. Yeah, it's no mystery. We got a ton of mosquitoes this year. It rained a lot. And if it rains a lot next year, we're gonna have a ton of mosquitoes then too. So it's no mystery about why. I don't think anyone's confused about that. It's all of the rain we've had. But yeah, best for the most. I guess I'm worried about the future too, and what does this do for our pollinators? What does it do for all the cats that are out roaming around at night and get dosed by this stuff? And, you know, this could be a situation of, you know, personal responsibility and pull yourself up and put on long sleeves and get some DEET. And I know that like, yeah, we gotta kind of try and do something, and we're doing the larvicides, and I don't know, maybe take half of the budget and buy half a shipping container of DEET and hand it out to anybody that wants to protect themselves. But I don't think that nuking the entire insect population is the answer for now or for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lack.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Flick, is there anyone online?
There is not, Mayor Grosbeck.
Okay. At this time, I'll close public comment and bring it back to the board. I guess this is a good time to try and answer some of the audience questions. And thank you all, by the way, very, in my opinion, very good, valid questions and very polite on both sides here. We heard that, what are the downsides of the permethrin spraying, Mr. Gonzalez?
Yes, excellent questions by the community. I'm gonna turn that over to Chris Manley from our environmental health group that does the toxicology into this. So, Chris?
Yeah, great questions and great comments. I agree. The spray that's used in insecticide treatment is what's called an ultra low volume spray. So it's a permethrin is the chemical compound or the most common chemical compound that's used. It's a synthetic, man-made chemical that is derived from a chemical that's in a chrysanthemum flower. But the key to the way that is used and sprayed in the adulticide treatment is it is done. Number one, it's done when at the time of day when it has the most likelihood to impact mosquitoes and the least likelihood to impact non-target species. So we are very sensitive to the fact that it can affect pollinators that are not typically active at night. Not to say that they can't be, but that's their dormant period versus mosquitoes when they're most active. So the spray is planned then. It's very weather dependent. So when we do plan a spray, it is all dependent on weather. We want to make sure we're able to target those areas that we're intending to spray. And as far as the chemical itself, it's pretty extensively studied. It is the most commonly used chemical in adulticide treatments in the U.S. It's been around since the late 70s, so it's extensively studied. It is a safe chemical, and the key to its safety is that ultra low volume spray. So that rate is typically 3 to 4 ounces an acre. So we're using a very small amount of chemical over and creating very, very fine droplets that can knock down mosquitoes, but you're not using a lot of chemical in any one area. So that's really the key to the effectiveness of that treatment.
Just to follow up on that, some of this had to do with the ecosystem around the humans. So if a cat or something were to eat a mosquito or something land on that area, what is the effect of it, like a secondary species seeing some kind of negative effect?
Yep. The biggest impact of this chemical in the way that it's sprayed is to other pollinator species. So it's primarily bees, other similar insects. Those are the insects that are going to be impacted. It is not an impact to pets, not an impact to people. Typically the guidance is when the spray truck is out, if you see the truck coming down your street, you should go inside. It's not necessary, that spray is not harmful to people and pets.
Next one was by, I didn't write down your last name, the clerk has it, Bashina. Can you go over the effects of West Nile? The 1 in 50 is what I read as well. 1 in 50 affected, have a serious case, is that correct?
1 in 150.
1 in
Sure.
150,
Yeah, so like any virus, there's asymptomatic. We learned that through the pandemic. But with West Nile virus, it's a virus that affects about 1 in 5 people that will either get that fever, they'll get the headache, they get kind of fog, brain fog, those kind of things. And then 1 in 150 get the actual, what we call neuroinvasive, that encephalitis. That can be long-term. It can be threatening as far as being crippled. You can have the neurological issues for the rest of your life, and then ultimately, unfortunately, in some cases, death. Last year in Berthoud alone, there were 4 West Nile virus cases that were reported to us. I'm trying to get my numbers back up here. And 2 of those cases were neuroinvasive. So those were serious, where they were in the hospital, serious issues. 3 of them did require hospitalization to were neuroinvasive. Consider that you had a vector index of just at 1 and your abundance was way lower. So that's where I'm here as your public health director, encouraging you to take this one step, because where we're at with the vector index and the abundance, we hate to see that be 8, 12, 16, whatever that may be, where people are in the hospital, our friends, families, our community members because of this virus. And when we can hopefully knock down the amount of virus that we have within the mosquitoes at this time.
So to follow up on that, the stats you had from last year, is that coming from a doctor? That means that they felt ill enough to have to show up? Or is that coming from them at home? How are the people affected report to you?
Yeah, it's a reportable disease, so we get it from the lab or from a medical provider.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem?
I actually did have a question. The 4 individuals you were speaking of, do you know the ages of those individuals off the top of your head? Is that information we could have?
I don't have that, but Erica, is that handy? Do you have that by chance?
Yeah, just because it's such a small number that was reported, I can give you a range. So, the age ranges were between, give me 1 second, sorry. 53 to 75.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, trustees? Well, we got the professionals here and
Well, I do, just in follow-up, to one of the audience, questions of specifically asking, based on their current test results, how does that equate to, the Culex mosquitoes, and then infections in people, and then the likelihood or estimates of serious cases based on our current test?
Let me make sure I understand your question. You're asking, based on the vector index of 3.0, what is the likeliness that we will have human cases? Am I correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so at 0.5, that basically says there's a correlation that we will most likely within the incubation period of 1 to 2 weeks see a human case. 1, you will. That's pretty much through the data that the 2 studies that were earlier cited. 3, I honestly have never seen that in my career. So that would be 3 times more. Certainly our CSU experts, correct me if I'm wrong, so you're at an extreme level of where 1 was usually, you're gonna see human cases. 1, there's a significant correlation. 3, that's something new to us, so that's very alarming.
But any stats on, based on our population in the area, based on where these tests are located and the results that we're seeing, can you compute any projections on human cases, what we might see?
Yeah, I could unfortunately do that. I have to be pulling out some statisticians with this, but I'm concerned you're gonna have human cases. That's kind of concerning. What we wanna do is knock it down as quick as possible. I agree, the 4Ds are so important. It was brought up by the community. Great, they've gotten the message. Unfortunately, the Culex mosquito can't get indoors through a cracked screen or whatever, and they can bite you indoors, even if you feel safe in your home. That's one difference between some of the Culex and the Aedes mosquitoes. So there's times people weren't outside, they weren't out in dusk or dawn, and they got West Nile virus in areas that would have high vector indexes. So there is that as well. It's just those mosquitoes and the amount of abundance can get indoors and ultimately infect somebody if they're positive.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
I guess final question on mine, in terms of the spray, the synthetic parathyroids, what is the effective amount of time? So say it's sprayed, how long is it still effective until that compound becomes inert and things can kind of go around it and it's not gonna hurt anything?
Chris?
Yeah, it's typically it's gonna hang, that ultrafine mist is gonna hang in the air 30 to 60 minutes, is about the length of time that it's gonna stay airborne, and then it's gonna knock down. So it does stay airborne. Again, if you're trying to knock down mosquitoes, that's extremely effective. Hanging a mist for an hour or so when they're flying around, but it dissipates pretty rapidly.
Right, but when it dissipates, that concentration goes away. I guess, how effective is it after it dissipates? Is it still, on contact, mosquitoes will get it and drop dead? Or if it kind of wanders over a house or something after it settles and like a cat walks through it, is it gonna hurt the animal, anything like that? I guess
Its effectiveness is really when it's hanging in the air as that ultrafine mist. Once it's dropped out, the next day it breaks down pretty rapidly in sunlight. So it doesn't have a length of time, really a measurable length of time where it's going to be effective after that mist phase.
Okay.
So this is passed along by corvids for the most part, and then this can reproduce from the adult mosquito to the larva? That's how it continues along? Or
Yes, it's the Culex mosquitoes, the Culex pipiens and tarsalis are the two Culex species in this area. There's another third, but it's very minor. And our typical reservoir host is the bird, the corvid bird, our magpies, crows, blackbirds, and even some raptors too. And so it's a female mosquito. They're the ones that go for the blood. So you get an adult mosquito, female mosquito that feeds on a bird with West Nile virus, then transports that over to a human is the typical cycle. And then when we get into the larva and so forth, I think did we lose Kim? Or no, Kim, you're still there. Kim's more of an expert when it gets to that whole cycle. Kim, what could you add that I missed on that or left out?
Our primary transmission is that mosquito to bird and then falling over into the human population. It can be passed from the adult mosquito to the larva, but that's probably not really the primary concerning way that we're getting infected mosquitoes. Most of those mosquitoes are going to get infected through that cycle where they're feeding on birds repeatedly.
Okay, thanks. That correlates with what I thought. The press release had it that it continues on through from the adult to the larva. So there's always going to be a threat as long as there's infected birds in the area, even after a spray. All they have to do is recontact that bird. Is that fair to say?
Kill birds.
Yes, they could, perpetuate that cycle just because we do have infected birds, so we're not trying to take out the birds, but if we can remove some of the mosquitoes from that cycle.
Just to get it down to manageable, sure.
Try to break that, yeah.
Okay. And for Administrator Kirk, the high areas this time around, or really anyone, one was in Wells, right, out by Serenity Ridge, is that correct? And the other one somewhere in town?
2 weeks ago, the primary, or the two test pools that were positive came from Town Park and I believe the other was the North Trap, which is kind of Third and Bunyan.
Okay.
And then last week, the positive test pool came from the trap out by Serenity Ridge.
But the other two went down below.
They did.
below 0.75.
Well, there was no positive test from the mosquitoes in those traps, but again, as the health department pointed out, they didn't test all of the mosquitoes that were collected. So it's possible they were, and I mean, because what we're talking about is a small number even within a large number of
Sure.
mosquitoes, right? So you only need one or two within a small sample size of mosquitoes to have a pretty high vector index.
Yeah, so the downside of this test around was understandable. There was just so many, but we don't really know per trap because there was so many.
No, I don't think we can, I think from my perspective, not being a scientist or biologist of any kind, you know, the idea that there's clearly West Nile virus infected birds in the area, we have a very high abundance of mosquitoes, right? So the idea is not that we're gonna eliminate West Nile. If it's in the birds, it's in the birds.
Right.
The idea is that we're gonna reduce the total adult mosquito population and lessen the chance that there are a lot of mosquitoes infected with West Nile.
So
We're
it's just
we're
hard to
carrying
do
West
quadrant
Nile.
zoning if we don't know per trap.
I would say that would be a tough decision to make. Yes.
Trustee Murphy?
Just to follow up on that, if I could ask this question to our health advisors here. So looking at the studies that this policy is based on, you don't necessarily need to test all mosquitoes in a population because you have an increase in female population correlating with the number of West Nile tests positive, correct?
That is correct, yes, sir.
So when you only test 14% of the population, you can make the assumption, because there is a direct correlation between population and the infected mosquitoes, to suggest, more likely than not, that the mosquitoes are carrying it even if we have not tested them. Is that correct?
That's well said, yes.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay,
I want to follow up.
Yep.
How transient or how far does mosquitoes migrate? We talked about this last year, and what I'm getting to is, because what I'm thinking in my head is if we do spray a certain sector or area, but as a town, we are surrounded by a lot of unincorporated area. How effective is a spray if mosquitoes migrate, extensively? So how, in your estimation, give us a little, more comment on the migration of mosquitoes.
That's a great question, and Chris has that answer. Thank you.
Mr. Manley?
Yeah, good question, and typically Culex mosquitoes, they're gonna have a range around those breeding sites. 1 to 3 miles is kind of the average range that a Culex mosquito travels. They can travel further, there's some evidence of that, but that's kind of a typical range that mosquito travels.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't want to belabor this point, but that was kind of my thought process here. If the really high one this time around was I-25, that's 5 miles away from most of our population, except for a small development called Serenity Ridge. So if they only go 1 to 3 miles, how can we still be, and with this population count was so large that we can't say which trap these came from? How can we say reliably that there's a high amount in town versus the I-25 small area? Does that make sense, or?
No, that was the one reason why we moved the traps a couple years ago, because they were in areas that were outside our spray zone.
Okay, it still doesn't answer for, and maybe it's just the problem of having so many that we can't go out by trap and say which one is which.
Well, and if you read our policy, it says testing 2 consecutive weeks in a row, 0.75 or higher.
Mhm.
We had one set of traps 1 week, test 0.75, then we had a different set of traps, test 3. So to me, we didn't have 2 consecutive weeks of 0.75 or higher unless we accumulate all the tests together as one. Those other traps actually kind of self-corrected themselves.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a good question. Perhaps maybe Tom or Greg might be able to answer.
Thank you.
But I believe the vector index is calculated across all traps, not per trap. So that 3.029 vector index is a cumulative number. Is that correct, Tom?
I would make sure either Kim or Greg on that one.
Yeah, so we calculated in Fort Collins by quadrant of the city. We don't calculate it per individual trap. One of the things that I think you've gotten from looking at this the way that you have thus far tonight is that this data is always, it's always really noisy. There's a ton of variance in how many mosquitoes out there that you catch. And so, we always get a little bit nervous about treating around one trap or a cluster of traps that are really close together, because what you're trying to do is to reduce the risk overall. And you're trying to minimize the amount of pesticide that you put into the environment while maximizing the effect on kind of what the underlying problem is. So that's kind of a long way of saying that the vector index is calculated for a group of traps, and typically, although there's some, again, this isn't always true, that's done on the basis of some sort of predefined unit where we say, this is the unit that we care about, and we're gonna calculate it from here, and that's what's gonna drive our decisions about what we do with the data. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, help me out, thanks.
Help you out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm murky. Okay, any other questions? Before we go down the line here, is any trustee want to say anything particular? Okay, we'll start off with trustee Hardy.
What we're gonna do?
Just say how you feel.
I think we're trying to fight fire with fire in my case. We're trying to deal with one health issue that's not of pandemic level. And then we're just trying to fight it with another issue that might cause health issues. I mean, I know lots of people that are probably just as hypersensitive to chemical inhalation in their 53 to 75 age range as they are probably to getting West Nile. So what are we trying to do here? Which health issue do we want to go after? Do we want one or do we want two? Because that's what we'll be doing, in my opinion, is adding a second health issue for those that can't handle the airborne, even with the windows closed. We have a lot of forced air conditioning units that force that air through our homes as well. I also kind of find it interesting, strange that, we do have historically high rain this year. So seeing our mosquito numbers and populations as high as it is, doesn't surprise me too much. The testing itself, man, if I only tested a portion of whatever I was supposed to test in any of my college assignments, I would have failed my class because it would have been inaccurate data according to my professor. So that's why I'm questioning the data on what we're receiving, because there's a lot of assumption based on just a small sampling of what we're getting to assume that we're gonna have West Nile and all those mosquitoes. Also looking at the trap data from week to week, we had 2 traps that tested positive that were highlighted in yellow in that document that we got. Next week, those traps were not highlighted in yellow, they dropped back down, and then we get a nice spike out of the Weld County one. So, it's moving around. If you want to call it self-correcting, self-corrected. That's part of the reason why we did this 2 consecutive tests in a row. Maybe we need to clarify in our ordinance that it's, a zone or as a trap or whatever. Test more consecutively 2 weeks in a row. That it calls for a meeting like this. We kept it pretty broad, I think, to allow for some interpretation and discussion like this. So I don't know how strictly refined we want to maybe consider that. But I'm glad we're having the discussion and not just shooting from the hip and going out there and wanting to spray for something that we don't even know a lot about. I mean, they won't even disclose 100% of the chemicals that's used in the synthetic neurotoxin that they're spreading out there. So I've got a lot more on this. I could keep talking on it, but I don't know if it would be heard. But overall, I think we're basically creating a secondary health issue with the spray.
Well, yeah, I appreciate points I'm writing them down here. Trustee Butler?
My thoughts are I'm candidly torn. As, you know, Trustee Hardy just mentioned, it's a balancing act of public health, to fight, you know, potentially fire with fire, risk versus benefit. I do appreciate the you know, health guidance from the county on this. I'm a little, I guess, personally unsure of how this whole process works with, and I'm just vocalizing here, CSU testing. You know, we get these results back, but we had a press release sent out on Saturday before any of us, I think even staff, am I correct, Chris, and that none of us here in the town were aware what these results read?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were aware from the information that we'd received verbally, but I hadn't seen the test results at that point.
And then, you know, this is off topic, but this press release also stated we were gonna have a public meeting before that was even called to order.
And that was, I told Tom as we were talking that I had informed the board last week that if the data came back on Monday, which is when we typically get our test result data, if the data came back on Monday, that I had informed you guys last week that we'd be calling a special meeting for Tuesday night. So
Okay.
in fairness, I think, you know, we had not called a special meeting yet, but I wasn't expecting to call one as soon as we did, because we don't typically receive that test data until Monday.
Right.
We did receive it early on Sunday. I think it just as a simple result of the high vector index numbers and wanting to get that information out as quickly as possible.
Right. I'm just publicly stating I don't feel good about how this went down, for all those listening. That's just my personal opinion though. Outside of that, I'm torn, just to continue some opinion, I guess that's all this is. We live in the, you know, the garden spot. We're in a rural community, in comparison to other local municipalities. We have a lower population that's spread out, less dense, surrounded by unincorporated areas. And I'm not the expert, but I'm based on, you know, bird migration, mosquito migration. I don't know, I haven't heard any factual evidence of how effective this, you know, spraying is. So at the moment, I'm uncomfortable to vote yes for spraying. I understand our policy, but it sounds like that the board has a lot of discretion on this tonight. I guess one follow-up question is, if we don't vote to spray this week, we have another high test next week, what would that look like?
I think that's an important conversation that we need to have tonight. If the vector index is above 0.75 again next week, we'll have a meeting on Tuesday night anyway. That's one of your regular town board meetings. So I suppose we could add it to the agenda on Monday if need be, to have you guys consider again whether or not you want to spray, if you choose not to do that tonight.
And then go through this again, which to me feels like a fire drill. That's just my personal sentiment.
No, but the thought of
But
how
I mean,
this.
we would need to have, was it 7 Larmont County officials explain all this to us again next meeting. We just take what we had tonight and go, okay, what do you guys think?
Yep.
Where we at?
Okay, does that,
Yeah,
no,
no,
I'm vague,
thanks.
but that's
No, that, yeah,
Sharon's thoughts.
that's great. I think it helps all of us out. Trustee Murphy?
I had a lot of thoughts on this. Did a lot of heavy research last year, prior to our decision to toss out the 2017 policy, which I think personally was a mistake. We're sitting here tonight having the same discussions over the same points. The science has not moved as far as I've seen. Trustee Hardy has made a number of assertions here, but do you have any credentials or studies to back your assertions that this chemical that's been used for multiple decades across the United States has a tangible effect on our residents in the way it's
Yeah,
being.
showing me that it's truly
Excuse
safe.
me, can I have my time? So the science we do have on this is credible and as close to home as possible. These studies that the health department experts, more expert than I am, come from this area, from the counties around here. There's a direct correlation between our vector index and human cases. We saw that last year. We are vastly beyond where that was last year. Over one, there is certainty that we will have cases. But the studies also show that we wouldn't have to test any of these traps for West Nile to show a correlation. You can look at the female population. When that is up, it is more likely than not that we are going to have West Nile in the area. It's just the presence of that mosquito and the populations are directly correlated. We had 4 cases and 3 hospitalizations. If we are not taking action on this, we are neglecting the public health and safety of our citizens. We can be certain by our neglect over the past 2 weeks under the current policy that we will have cases. There will be more. I question the necessity of this meeting tonight because we are coming up with policy on the fly here. Nobody knows whether we are going to spray tonight or not. I'm very happy with the staff's response to this and their coordination with the health department. I think it's a significant improvement over last year. So I have no problems there. I feel like the communication failure with this new policy is on us because nobody knows in this town what we are going to decide tonight. And nobody can plan around that. Nobody can work around that one way or the other. I've worked for the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the City of Boulder. I've managed invasive species. I've applied these chemicals. Everything that these chemicals have to do with is your timing of the application, the quantity, and the actual uses. This permethrin, it does have drawbacks. It does hurt our pollinators. If misused and applied in a higher concentration or applied to aquatic areas, it will have harmful impacts. By applying at these times and these concentrations, we're mitigating the impact for pollinators. Not eliminating, mitigating. These are tools in our tool chest that need to be used occasionally. I would prefer we never sprayed in this town. I certainly don't support spraying from a convenience standpoint, ever. These are heavy tools for heavy use, but we are facing a health issue. And I'm not willing to put one resident in this town at risk for perceived or possible implications for our pollinators. This is simple to me, and I hope the board understands this is coming from my personal experience, practical application, and as best as I can, logic. I would very much support revising and going back to a similar policy as the 2017 one. I'm open to that discussion, but doing this on the fly in a meeting where we rehash the same issue without any new science, I think is a failure on the part of this board.
Didn't cut you off. Okay, thanks.
That's all good.
No,
No,
and this,
appreciate it.
I should have said this in the very beginning, but you don't have to say anything. I just want to give everyone an equal opportunity to express viewpoints if they'd like to. Mayor Pro Tem.
Generally, as a rule, I prefer people over bugs. That said, there's a lot of this that seems to be, we get a lot of this information late. We get a lot of this information a week after it was effective. And that delay causes all sorts of overreach or underreach, depending on what side you're sitting on regarding spraying. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. I mean, in terms of when the traps are caught, when everything is tested, when we get those reports back, if it was same day or even within a few days, we would have far better optics on exactly what's going on and how to best appropriately respond effectively, as opposed to, a week later. I remember this time last year that we did, I believe, spray, and it turned out that the previous week's test hadn't even come in yet. It came back in and everything had dropped, just inexplicably. So to that point, I'm hesitant on making any decisions on spraying this evening. However, I do echo that we should readdress this, and having to rehash this exact same school session every time vector index goes up, I think that, to your point, it is ineffective. We have better ways to do this, and we could come up with a more effective way to be protective of our citizens, but also of our local ecosystem, which will also be effective. So, no, that's it.
Yeah, so doing this in 2016, and it sounds like the board tonight, there's some element of being torn for the most part. I don't think any of us want this to have to spray. Nothing like, I think Loveland just does it based on a nuisance, and so does Greeley around events and stuff. And slowly over time, with Trustee Lack's help and Tim as well, there's kind of been an opening of my mind to having, I think, above a 0.25 is which our original one is. Then we went to 0.5. Then we went to 0.75. And then last year, I wasn't in attendance, but I would be honest, I supported the last year's one of 2 consecutive tests of 0.75. My thoughts are continuing this. We might as well not have a policy, because I don't know what the point is of waiting and waiting and waiting. I think long-term, this could spike again, but this knocks down the population that we have right now. I mean, it could be mid-August it does it again, but I think the points by the professionals is that this has an instant effect. And I'm really happy to hear, I think it's Mr. Manley or something, that this does have an effect on the environment. When we started in 2016, the presenter at that time said it has 0 effect on the environment, only on the mosquitoes. And that's kind of a red flag to me, but everything has an effect. So it's good to hear tonight this have an effect. Sounds minimal, and I don't want to do this, but I'm in favor tonight, especially that this has gone above 0.75, this has gone to 3.0, of having to do this. And I just question, Trustee Murphy, you want to have, sounds like a more strict policy we had in the past. Others want to continue this. I think that's a conversation we have to have in the future of which way to take this. But I just can't kick the can down the road anymore. Part of me is that we have a policy to do this, to have the conversation. To me, a 3.0 is high enough to take action, so we should. I'd love to get more clear data going forward on which trap, how we handle large amounts of mosquito populations like 5.0. Sounds like right now we can't do this quadrant zoning just based on we're assuming the whole town has it. So I'm in favor right now. I'd certainly be in favor of revisiting this one way or another. But I do agree ultimately with you, Trustee Murphy. We, in my opinion, we have an obligation here, being so high. This isn't a 0.75, this is a 3.0. And I think that this current policy is as conservative as I'd like to take it. And I appreciate taking the pressure off staff and putting it on the board. This is also a political decision. Last year, even though it was on staff, Chris was not immune to being put in a political role. So this throws it back where it should be, in my opinion, which is us. So I am in favor of this reluctantly. I don't think I'm going home patting myself on the back. But I feel my vote, I have to vote in favor here. If there's anything else, trustees? Trustee
I'd
Murphy?
like to say something as
Go
well. If you took my comments the wrong way, Trustee Hardy, I'd like to apologize. I don't mean to come off as heated. I'm very passionate on this issue. And if you would like to rebut what I said, I'm totally open to that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a PhD per se, but in all my years of working with bugs and beekeeping and following the studies and things that are being done around the world with beekeepers and the efforts that they're doing to mitigate things like promethium and even other chemicals that Monsanto's putting out there in our food for GMOs and all that other stuff. There's a lot of chemicals out there that we expose ourselves to overly unnecessarily, and a lot of people don't even realize we're ingesting these things and what they do. It's often years later that we've applied applications of pesticides. It's been proven, it's been on our news. I don't have to have a PhD to repeat that, to show you that some of these chemicals can be truly toxic to us, and we don't find out until years later after we thought we were trying to do something good and it ended up being something really bad. I don't feel like there's been enough information to prove how safe this is, unless somebody wants to come in here with a peach and spray it with some promethium and eat it in front of me and then test them in 2 weeks to see how they feel. You know, maybe that would prove me a little bit different, but there's efforts nationwide and worldwide to reduce our chemical usage and get back to more truly natural methods of doing things. I know areas that are been documented of purchasing eggs for dragonflies and other good insects, and even increasing bat populations to try and naturally reduce their mosquito populations. I think we just find the easy way out. If you follow social media, people don't complain about West Nile virus on social media. They complain about getting bit. I don't think West Nile is even on the conscious of most of our citizens because they aren't talking about it, at least. Most of the people that call me are more concerned about the chemical use than they are about West Nile. So to me, it's not a pandemic issue, and we're spending a lot of money on something for a handful of people. Whereas, you know, we talked about the pandemic, Tom Gonzalez brought that up, and that was definitely scientifically proven that, hey, we had a serious health issue. And, you know, we had people in our community that refused to wear masks or get the shot or any of that stuff. So we can talk science all we want, but I think this really comes down to what really are the numbers. I mean, do we want to really go out and spray and cause another health issue for 2 people in our community? You know, I don't know. I mean, that sounds kind of harsh, but I think we got to look at the greater good and look at this as truly as a health issue, and are we creating a secondary health issue? I mean, on PPAN's website, you could probably find some data there. There's usually data up there about chemical use. A lot of it is about mosquito spraying. Every time on my beekeeper sites, I'm part of a lot of them along Colorado, Florida, Ohio, California. Oh my God, you see the posts blast up and their communities say they're gonna go spray for mosquitoes. They all panic. So, yeah, I don't have a PhD, but I do follow this, and it should be of concern. We should be careful of what we are putting out there. So, and I'm not convinced otherwise that it's a safe chemical. Chemicals aren't considered safe in any means. They're meant to do something of harm if you ingest them. I mean, go down any chemical aisle. Do not ingest. Do not inhale. So, I don't know. If I came in here with a kit in my mouth and started spraying around here, you guys would probably be like, Tim, take that outside. So, like my wife does when I spray on myself in my back porch. But anyway, that's a moot point there. But anyway, I think there's better ways to deal with this, and I feel like the tests weren't consecutive. You know, overall it was, but if we look at zones, we had the same issue before. One would spike it, you know, and then that would set off our average everywhere else. So I'm still against spraying though for this, because I think it's chemical trespass.
Yeah, so I think that's a separate issue, but I think that's one we need to have of what would be the trigger point for trustees on this that are against it. Or if there is, if not, then.
Mayor Kursbeck, may I point one thing out? I just didn't want, a member of the public couldn't be here tonight. He submitted his comments to you via email, and I told him I'd print them out and hand them to you. He asked me to make sure that I pointed out that that was provided to you so that there would be record that his comments were received from Jeff Hyman. So I just wanted to mention that that occurred. So that's clear from the transcript.
Yep, we all got it.
Meeting.
I tried to ask some of those questions around I-25 and whatnot. We don't have BDCI. Go ahead, Trustee Murphy.
Just one more thing, before I beat the dead horse. did come up with a number of provisions that I think would be acceptable in revising the 2017 policy. I wonder if the board would maybe entertain me sharing those in the reports next week, or
Yeah, I
actually, I'll
think-
be out the next 2 meetings, but rather than make it a full agenda item again, I feel like I've got some ideas that would be widely appreciated and maybe acceptable at refining our policy.
Absolutely, you don't have to
At
get
least to
permission
just entertain.
to have under reports, so.
It's definitely something you can send in an email, we just can't discuss it via email, but
Sure.
at least you can get your thoughts on in writing, we have something to read.
I'd be interested in hearing all your thoughts on it, to just get more dialed in a way that, you know, respects our residents, but also kind of addresses a lot of the concern. And, so I'll definitely share that with you guys, whether it's email or reports. Thank you for your consideration, all of you.
Yeah. Go ahead, trustee Butler.
So we have presented with us a couple possible motions and actions. If we were to move forward with applying the adulticide spray, would that, as this motion is drafted, be townwide?
I think that's up to the board.
Yeah, I think it's up to us if we wanna.
Yeah, I mean, I
make
think you can tell us either way. If you didn't specify, we would spray townwide.
Right, okay, so it's not specified, correct, okay.
Okay.
And for clarity, we did talk to VDCI last week. VDCI is Vector Control Disease International, Vector Disease Control International, sorry. They're the contract firm that we use to support our kind of pest management policy. They do the larviciding and they would do the spray as well. If the board votes, the earliest that we could possibly spray is this Friday. And maybe even a little bit later. A lot of communities around us use the same contractor. They're all spraying, Fort Collins, Johnstown, and others. So just so that you're aware, we will not be spraying tomorrow night, even if the board votes yes today. And we think it's important to get enough notice out to folks so they have time to cover their gardens or do the things that they wanna do to protect their properties. So we'll need some time to do some notice. We'll also have to have some time to schedule. We've asked VDCI if we could kind of prioritize, given our exceptionally high vector index. We just need to work out those details. But it's possible that we may not spray till at the earliest Friday.
At the earliest Friday. And so we'll have a trap data out, and we'll get notification out by the following Monday, or results back by the following Monday.
That's true.
That
And so
changes my mind.
this is part of the challenge with the timing of testing.
I think,
If we don't have an automatic trigger and we wait until we can meet, and by the time we meet and then we can schedule a spray, it's possible, like in this case, that we'd likely, and this is basically what occurred last year as well. We sprayed after we collected trap data. There were environmental factors that kept the numbers down, we believe, in that test that occurred between.
Yeah.
Wind and other things that we think suppressed the numbers that we collected in the traps regardless. So we don't know exactly how that affect. I have no idea, and I don't know that we can confidently say whether or not the spray we had last year is what brought the vector index down, or whether or not it was just environmental conditions, it was the end of the season and things started to kind of decline naturally.
Okay.
But I wanna be clear that if the board votes tonight, we will not be spraying until after we collect traps this week. And so,
That's interesting.
so it's possible,
I think
That-
going forward, we need to, VDCI have a priority if public health is attacking us, or not attacking, notifying us, right? Versus Loveland, who's nuisance spraying, we have to wait for that. I mean, we're putting ourselves at risk here for 72 hours. We might as well wait the other 48 to get new results back.
well, and I think, you know, we won't get, but see, that's the thing, so we won't get results back on Wednesday, we won't get results back until,
No, if you're saying Friday at the earliest, and our next meeting's Tuesday, and that's at the earliest, right? So it could be Saturday or Sunday.
I believe that's the case from our staff, yeah.
Yeah, that should be Tom, I'm glad you're on here. That should be a county conversation here of who gets priority with VDCI, or if there's any other contractors out there.
And some of it is because they've already committed to other communities who have already made the decision, right? And so, for all they know, the board's gonna vote no, and then they've now bumped someone else who's already committed to spray and contracted them to do so. I can understand the position that they're in as well, for what it's worth. And so, if we don't have that
Fire up the old Berthoud fogger. Old Nissan pickup truck.
Jesus.
Well, that, I'll go back and that changes my mind. If you just gotta wait another 48 and we're already putting our risk for 72, this is contentious, you might as well wait till we get another round. Then that question is that conversation happens again that Tuesday night, if it's still high. I'd hope by that point we'd have a conversation with VDCI and not have to wait another week after that. I mean, this is.
The only thing that we could do is contract with them for a specific spray date and then waive them off if the board
Yeah.
changed their mind. There may be some costs associated with that, cause they're gonna obviously they're not going to schedule someone else, they might be scheduling the night they do our work, right?
Do they
So-
bill by the mile? How do they bill?
Oh, I honestly can't recall, I think it's by the amount of product applied or something, by the mile, okay.
Interesting.
Am I correct, Jeremy, in that our conversations with BDCI, the earliest we could likely spray is Friday?
Yeah, that's what we have currently.
So I wanted to make sure that was clear, cause I don't wanna be,
When's that trap data collected?
it's typically collected on Wednesdays. Traps are typically collected Wednesdays, we typically get the results back the following Monday.
So we would never know the effect of that next week if we're collecting traps before we're spraying. We'd know, yeah, prior to.
We would know, so this is an interesting part of the challenge, right? Wednesday night is likely to be thunderstorms, so we're not gonna get good test data if it's pouring rain. Environmental factors can change how those,
When do they put the traps out?
Jeremy?
Tuesday.
they put,
Tuesday
Today.
they collect and count and we get the results Wednesday.
okay.
The results come Wednesday, but they pick up Tuesdays.
So
But how
they picked
long-
up today
Yes, sir.
and we'll get the results back tomorrow?
For trapping.
Only in terms of the number of mosquitoes that are
Yeah.
collected, we don't actually get the test data back.
Yes.
So we know before the end of the week how many mosquitoes were collected. We do not know how many of those mosquitoes had West Nile until this last week. It was Sunday, we got that test data back, the Larimer County Health Department had it a little bit earlier on Saturday.
Yeah, but you did notify.
Typically
yeah,
get it
yeah.
on Monday.
Yeah, you notified the board, so it's not like we got it yesterday.
It's a 4-day stall regardless of what we do. That's,
Just- It's imperfect.
there's plenty of room
Leapfrog.
for improvement, that's just limitations of what it is, it's just frustrating, cause a
But I
lot of
think,
this is very time-based.
but I think it's also important that we not look at it as, here's we see a lot of mosquitoes and we're out kind of, we're not spot spraying. It's not like when you see a big anthill at your house, you go out and drop some granules to try and take care of that
And if we do
anthill.
spray, will they still follow our guidelines of spraying after 10 p.m.?
We set the terms for how they do that, and again, the intent is to apply that adulticide at the times when the mosquitoes are most active and when we can mitigate the effects of the environment to the extent that we can.
Cause that's one thing that's
That-
interesting about
that's-
the Colix mosquito that carries West Nile is that they fly all night, whereas all the other mosquitoes that are just nuisance go to bed, end up partying at night.
Yeah, and again, our intent is not to spray for nuisance. I think that's been a clear policy of the town for a long time. And so, yeah, the application of adulticide would be done at the time.
Yeah, we haven't
But
sprayed for
it's-
nuisance, even pre-2016.
Yeah, I don't,
Stopped that.
not as far as I know, I don't know that's been done in a very long time.
Probably before it was a budget
I
issue.
believe Greg from CSU had his
Yeah,
hand raised.
Mr. Yevel, absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the timing, cause it's my lab that does the testing, so the traps get put out on Tuesday night, they get collected on Wednesday. And then between Wednesday and Thursday, the mosquitoes that are in the trap, cause you get Culex mosquitoes, but you get all kinds of other stuff in there too, so VDCI between Wednesday and Thursday is sorting the mosquitoes by species and counting them all up, and that's the data that you get. We get them at the lab, usually like late Thursday afternoon, Thursday, evening, kind of depending. And there's people in the lab who are then processing and testing those mosquitoes. That happens usually starting pretty late on Thursday night, and then into Friday, we kind of generally know most of the testing results at some point on Saturday. And so this last week, because we knew that there was an issue, we wanted to push the results sooner because of the kind of conversation that we knew that you all are gonna need to have around that. But there's like a lot of human factors of just like how much work can you ask somebody to do who's sitting there with a microscope sorting mosquitoes for hours and hours and hours, and you know, how late are you gonna ask the kid who's working in the lab, you know, pipetting things back and forth to be doing this. And so anyway, it's always this issue of like how fast can you get the results and what's kind of the right way to communicate them out. But I wanted just to be, you know, for you all to have that information kind of about what our process is. And then also, you know, there's a lot of mosquito pools, and we're testing a heck of a lot of mosquito pools this year. And you know, usually, I won't say usually, but there's sometimes where we think, you know, we got to do that one again, because we really want to be sure about the correctness of the West Nile virus result. So that's why we usually put it out on Monday, because it kind of you know, it stirs the pot a little bit if you put it out sooner than typically you do. But in this case, we thought it was important. I just wanted y'all to have that context.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any way to rush it, in case of, we're being notified here, we're having a special meeting, is there any way to rush it to Friday day? And so we know by Friday night to call them off if it does go down?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really, really hard to do that, because you know, we just don't know week to week what we're gonna get. So, and I think that
Do you guys prioritize public, the level of, on your testing, is it first come, first serve, or is it community vector index?
No, it's not really. They all come in at the same time. And it's a couple of people who are working there, and they do them all at once. And they're tested kind of in batches of like 90-ish mosquitoes. And so if you have like a result for that batch, you know, you kind of know that one is going to be fine, but you don't want to provide partial data. So that's kind of why we would be why we really do kind of like to sort of push it all out at the same time.
Okay. Thank you for what you do. I didn't mean to.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I think we all get staffing issues,
Yeah.
but I think that's
Yeah,
also
no,
a county conversation of trying to work with you guys to prioritize the higher levels versus those that are just submitting for whatever. Okay,
Yeah,
anything
so
else?
we test for Fort Collins, Loveland, Berthoud, and Boulder City. So that's kind of everything, and everybody's in kind of the same boat that y'all are in right now too.
Does City of Boulder spray? I thought they didn't. Are they just testing for larviciding reasons then, or? Mr.
You muted.
Oh,
yeah.
so they do spray.
No, they don't spray.
Yeah, Boulder City does not.
Okay, so they're just doing it for other, okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we vote?
Oh, we need a motion first.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions, any conversation like Trustee Murphy and Trustee Hardy? I'm a little torn here. I'm going back and forth in my head.
Well, same. It's, what if we, and I say this because I know due to the people seated here right now, it's very contentious and not evenly split, and I don't think anybody here is exactly happy with the decision regardless, but that's the art of compromise. With the information that we'll be getting this next week, I think, you know, that will absolutely add more data to this, and I think that's kind of what everybody here wants to see, is what is the data gonna look like? What is this next round of data gonna look like? And I mean, I fully expect us to have to make this decision next week as well, unfortunately, but you know, waiting until we get a better insight of what's going on, I think is the best use of our information and give us a better chance to understand what's going on, what might change, if anything, because last year the same thing happened, where it was high and then it just naturally dissipated. But we won't know that until, you know, it's unfortunately late just because of timing and testing and results, but
When's the earliest we can get results back? We've got it Saturday because it was particularly hot topic. If we were able to get it Saturday again, is that reasonable assumption or Monday?
I think we should expect that we can get results back by Monday, because that's the typical timeframe. It sounded like from,
Well, I push for Friday. So I'm just, to the professionals online, since this is, we're being notified, it's going out to the public. This is a real big public health issue. Tom, is there a chance that we can rush this information again like we did last week?
if, Mayor Karspeck, could I ask the quick question as Tom is unmuting? If, let's say we got the data back on Saturday and the vector index was high again.
That's what I was gonna ask the board.
Would the board be looking to have a special meeting on Sunday to decide to spray, or wait
Or a
until
trigger,
Monday?
that was gonna be my point here, or a trigger that just says Sunday, if VDCI operates on Sunday, that would be the third high week. I was gonna pose that to the board, but before I just wanna make sure that if we could rush that data or not.
Could I make it?
To-
Go ahead.
I would look to Greg and his team and not wanna exhaust them where they would make mistakes, cause that's what could happen. But we'd certainly work with CSU and the team to get the results over to Chris as soon as we got them. I'll immediately call him, like we did on Saturday.
Here, I'll.
Cool.
So, I hate to make promises that I don't know for sure that I can keep about the timing of any of these results. There's a lot of stuff that can happen.
Mhm.
We could get our email on Thursday at 4:30, 5 o'clock saying, okay, we're sending you out 550 pools, and it's just, it's really, like, I will promise that you'll get your data on Monday, and if it can get there sooner, then sure, we'll do that, but it makes me very nervous. I don't wanna make
Yeah,
promises.
no, you're a true scientist, I respect that. So that was gonna be my point here, is if the third trap comes in high, we could put a trigger in place and say, Monday night we spray, because even, we wait 24 hours, but we're gonna be back having this conversation. And I think that was, the original policy was 2 high weeks, have this tough conversation.
Yep.
But do we spray a zone or do we spray the entire town? What are you thinking?
I think it would, go off those results, well. I guess, that one's a different one, but I would just say go to the whole town.
Or just simplify it, just say no spray and we wait till next Tuesday.
What would you change, so this is a question to you, what would change your mind?
What, to spray?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I was curious on that. Okay, did you have a point?
No, I thought the discussion around the revised 2022 policy of having 2 weeks in a row was to have this kind of certainty because of the testing regimen and the uncertainty that we're walking into. And for me, if we were to go down the road of a revised policy, I think an auto trigger would be more helpful. That would be agreeable to the board. Whatever that was, I think, we're close to it with the 0.75, which is in that scientific gray area. I would lean towards earlier and less applications in a more zone fashion, but I think in this instance, it behooves us to spray the entire town at this point. We have 2 consecutive weeks with off the charts mosquitoes, and we could get this wrong. We could drop off naturally next week.
No, true.
This is imperfect.
Yeah.
There's no 2 ways around it.
And I should reiterate, nothing is kind of a harsh answer. I could probably be swayed if there was enough urgency for me. I don't see this as being a high urgency. The data wasn't, to me, consecutive per trap. I think it went from, North Berthoud to way out east, 5 miles away. I've seen, it used to be historically our trap data that was always the one that produced the highest number of West Nile was up near TPC, out there with all the lakes, and it actually kind of came in fairly decent, I think, if I remember right. I'm trying to picture the chart in my head again. I don't have it in front of me. But yeah, to me, I don't think it's consecutive, if you wanna get it down to nitty gritty. If you take the average over, yeah, it's consecutive, but
So how about,
I think it's moving around too much.
yeah, no, I got your clarification there.
So I'd rather wait and
So we can do amendments to motions, so my thoughts are, the strictest first would be, spraying immediate, or as soon as possible, will be Friday. If that motion doesn't go through, I think we need still need 4 tonight.
Yeah.
Then we could do an amendment to see if we wanna put a trigger in for after the trap data, which would be Monday, if we can get VDCI for Monday night. And if that fails, we go to, is that fair for trustees to go down that line as far as motions like that?
what are you saying? Wait till Monday night to spray and wait for the trap data to come in?
Yeah, that would be that'd be the first amendment, would
And if
be,
the trap data comes in below 0.75, Chris would call him and cancel the spraying Monday night.
so we'd have it by Monday, we'd call them in Monday night.
I think that's a reasonable approach. My only concern with that is that we're gonna need to notify the public that we are spraying. And then, and so I don't wanna send mixed messaging. That, you know,
We could still notify
hey,
the
we're gonna
spraying.
spray on Monday night, and then I guess if we just don't spray, nobody's upset.
They'd be happy,
I don't know,
yeah,
but-
I just say there's a high likelihood we would, and if we're wrong, then hey, they
I
take
mean,
the
I
tarps off.
think any public information that we would do should say the town is scheduled spraying for Monday night. If that's the direction you guys wanna go. I think I'd wanna be really clear. I don't wanna leave it kind of up in the air,
Right.
because then I think people will be hoping that it doesn't happen and then be upset when it does.
I like that, we will be
Um,
spraying unless this data comes in.
I think I would just leave it as simple as the town is scheduled mosquito spraying, you know, for the evening of
Okay.
Monday night or whatever, if that's the flavor of the board.
Okay.
I guess what zones, is it all, everything in the town, or the only areas where the data is high? And that's, I guess, the follow-up to that, because that's the next piece to it, we can spray the whole town, or just zones where it's high?
I might add to this.
Please do.
I'm frustrated with the idea that we're revising this on the fly.
No, I'm just giving out options, yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, this is a do or do not do kind of scenario.
Right.
Largely on the communication side of things, like, we need to communicate effectively and stick to our guns, whatever our decision is. And I would appreciate that, I guess, more so than, a middle solution at this point, I guess.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So essentially, you. it
Sean's all
sounds-
or nothing, right?
It
All or
sounds,
nothing.
it sounds like you're in favor of the whole, town, so all the affected areas.
At this
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
If that was an amendment.
Still spray unnecessarily in areas that aren't affected.
But if we know, we don't know that, so I think that now we're getting to conjecture here. So who wants to make this motion here?
I will make the motion.
Trustee Murphy,
A move to apply adulticide via truck spraying after a minimum 24-hour notice to town residents via available communication outlets.
is there a second? I'll second that motion. Clerk, may I have a roll call vote?
Trustee Butler,
No.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace,
No.
Mayor Karspeck.
Yes. Okay, motion fails. Does anyone want to make that hybrid or not?
Yes.
Okay, trustee, or Mayor Pro Tem,
Do we need to make another motion or?
you don't have to, but you don't have to, yeah, if someone wants to.
I move to apply adulticide via truck spraying, after a minimum of 24-hour notice to town residents via available communication outlets, as of this coming Monday, after results read higher than 0.75 vector index, in the appropriate areas.
That you'd be spraying, to clarify, we're only spraying in the appropriate areas, the high truck
Right,
counts?
because we just got that data in, was my thought, so we are only spraying in the areas where it's high.
May I,
Commissioner
ask a clarifying question, because I think this is important. I think it's important we define what that is. If the board wants to do a more targeted spray, is that within a mile of the trap that tests positive? Is that within 2 miles?
Yeah, and that's hard, because they said the maximum was 3, and that,
So if it's within 3 miles of the trap,
you're gonna hit another trap.
you'll hit for instance, within 3 miles of the Bunyan and Third Trap is the entire town.
Oh, I see. So
Excluding
we can
Serenity
prove-
Ridge, and so I think it really depends on how far you
Oh, okay.
wanna
Clarifying.
push that limit.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then I'd like
Makes
to
sense.
clarify too, if it's the same zones that are high this week versus another whole new, cause maybe Wall County goes normal and then GPC goes high.
I think Mayor Pro Tem's point was the high trap count.
Yeah,
I would, in my opinion, support it for the whole town.
yeah. Is
you don't
there a
have to make
chance I
that.
can amend that
Yeah,
motion? So essentially, the spraying according to vector index above 0.75 for the town due to the size of the town. So that, not specific zones,
The whole town.
full town, assuming there are traps that read higher than 0.75.
Okay, is there a second? I'll second that. Clerk, may I roll call vote?
Can you clarify that, please? That was a little convoluted for me.
Sorry, so
Make sure I know what I'm
essentially, when the reports come back Monday, as soon as those reports come back, they'll indicate what zones, if any, have a vector index of 0.75 or higher. And essentially, that's the trigger of if there's a trap that reads 0.75 or higher, then that'll essentially trigger a spray for the town. Is essentially what it says.
Automatic trigger entire town spray.
Correct.
So basically, they said our vector index is over the average of all the traps. So if our average is over 0.75,
We've always done an average, right? Okay, so
As
I
long
think
as
we're going with
as long as I've been here, that's
the
the case.
previous policy of averaging these, so. Trustee Murphy?
Do we have delineated zones around the traps, and is that widely available to the public?
That was the question Administrator
We do
Kirk
not.
was trying to ask.
Are you comfortable making those maps on the fly?
No, I think, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. I was understanding that Mayor Pro Tem Grace was saying we would spray the whole town.
That's the way I took it too.
Which the second revision, because to your point, like where the traps are located, we can't, if you wanna put a boundary around each trap, that was my thought, is we're only hitting the areas where it's high concentration.
I mean, I
But-
think we can create those maps. I wouldn't wanna do that on the fly tonight, and we
Right.
need to have a very specific direction from the board about what those zones really looked like. And you know,
based on the proximity of the traps though,
I don't
The
think
trap
mosquitoes are
that's
bound by
outside.
street boundaries, and so,
Will County.
I think,
That's
yeah.
the furthest one away. The other traps in town are all within a 1 to 3 mile radius of each other, aren't they?
correct.
I think to have this conversation would be another special meeting.
So we only have 2 zones basically.
So it's up to you how you wanna propose that. And one triggers another conversation, the other one is we've been doing historically for years, as far as the whole town.
I mean, because we cannot put strict boundaries on what areas are getting sprayed versus not. I mean, as long as the average for the town is, I guess, about 0.75, that's where my motion would be for the whole town to get sprayed.
Okay.
Again, not my first choice, but
No, you, okay, I'm just trying to get to the motion point.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Trustee Butler?
yes.
Okay, and yours as well, Trustee Murphy. Okay, there's a motion, is there a second on that?
So what's the motion?
So the motion again, to reiterate, was to, if the trap data comes back, this week of an average of the town of 0.75 or higher, it triggers an automatic fogging or spraying of the entire town, as soon as possible.
That was gonna be my one requested clarification, that we schedule it for Monday night.
For Monday night.
Or as soon thereafter as we're able to with VDCI. So
Okay.
I think if we reach out tomorrow and see if we can get Monday scheduled, I'm hopeful that would happen.
So moved.
Okay, that's been amended again to Monday night in particular. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, it's been seconded. Any final clarifications? Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Hardy,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace,
Yes.
Trustee Butler,
Yes.
Trustee Murphy,
No.
Mayor Karspeck.
Yes. How many was that?
Three.
Okay, so that motion fails. Okay, is there a final, obviously one? Anyone wanna make the one regarding move to apply, nope, sorry, direct staff, well, this doesn't even have to be yep, direct staff to continue the larvicide program only.
I'll make that motion to continue the larvicide only.
Trustee Hardy has moved on this, is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem has seconded, is there any final clarifications?
So this, we are not gonna be spraying under this at this time.
Correct.
Okay.
Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
I'm sorry, before we vote, if I may, I think we have a question about whether or not and I'm sorry that our town attorney is not available to join us tonight, this would be helpful. whether or not.
The full board versus
I don't know
board
that in
president?
this case, it needs to be a vote of the entire board, but it's a vote of the quorum that's present.
I believe the same. Otherwise, missing members would be a real
Otherwise,
issue.
there'd be no point to ever have a meeting of 4.
Okay, so that still stands. The previous motion failed. Under this clarification.
So the previous motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Grace,
It's 3-2.
were in favor and 2 were against of the board members that are present tonight.
Ah, I see your point. Okay, so then under that clarification is the way I'm under with Robert's rules. Well, yeah, I guess it's not Robert's rules, it's just the way I took it, is that these decisions are made out of the board president.
Gotcha.
Do we need a legal opinion on this, or is this just a procedural issue?
If the motion was gonna be to not spray,
It was the clarification on spraying only if this future trap data comes out on the weekend. Do we be going for Monday night?
right, that, the follow-up motion to that, what was, I'm sorry,
Mike's motion was.
Clerk Smore and I were trying to,
The follow-up to that, since that failed.
Yeah.
Under 3-2, was larviciding only.
well, we're gonna continue with that regardless unless you tell us not to. And we are not spraying unless you tell us to spray, so
So that previous motion, it was 3-2, right? So
it was.
3 in favor.
So unless our town attorney disagrees, which I don't believe she will, I think it's a majority of the members that are present, we would continue with the motion that was already approved.
Yep,
And if the town attorney says, I disagree, it has to be a full majority of the board, which would have been 4, we'll let you know, and we'll let you know that we're continuing with larvicide application as we have been doing.
is that fair with trustees?
It seems reasonable enough.
Okay. Well, that means the board has moved on these issues. I want to thank everyone, no one else in the audience, but listening in, especially our professionals, especially if you're on vacation, you're calling in, giving up time with your family. That really means a lot. And also the fact that we have Lambert County in conjunction with CSU here tonight. It's hard to have a more professional panel on this. So thank you very much, and thank you, trustees. I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Tough one. There's no pat yourself on the back tonight, but.
I guess